the New York Knicks really? The New York Knicks are one of those franchises among the four major leagues in sports in North America. We look at the MLB, we look at the NFL, we look at NBA, and we look at the NHL. And we look at the New York Knicks, we think that is one of the most recognizable franchises, one of the most profitable franchises, but also similar to the Toronto Maple Leafs, similar to the Dallas Cowboys. They are one of the franchises that just have not performed that well over the past 5 years, possibly 10 years. I mean, if we are looking at the New York Knicks, they haven't made the playoffs since the 2012 or 2013 season. They have not had a winning record in almost 10 years. And now we see everyone coming out of the woodwork. Knicks fans we never knew were Knicks fans. Fans that we thought were on a different team are now suddenly Knicks fans. But how good are the Knicks really? How good are those scrappy New York Knicks? They've got a veteran coach in Tom Thibodeau who, over his career as a coach has been noted as getting the most out of his players. Honestly, kind of running his players to the ground and running them dry. We see Julius Randle has the most minutes played this season already. RJ Barrett, I believe, is just behind at third or fourth. So he gets a lot out of his players, but those two players that I mentioned, those aren't players that you would think would lead your team to a playoff spot, let alone lead your team to a home court advantage playoff spot. Now, like I mentioned, Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, they've got a rookie in Emmanuel Quickley, who's been great for them this year. They've got another rookie in Obi Toppin, playing at the power forward. Then they got two vets, Taj Gibson and Derrick Rose, who are also in that power forward point guard position, respectively. I think that's a great note that people should be happy about. If you are a fan of the New York Knicks, you have two established vets, two well-respected vets in Rose and Taj Gibson, helping out a young Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin. But when we look at the New York Knicks, do they have the stuff to be an impactful team in the NBA playoffs? In a 7-game series, yeah, I honestly do think the Knicks could beat the Atlanta Hawks. I think it would be a late series. I think it would either go 6 or 7. But I totally think that with Tom Thibodeau behind the helm, you've got a vet in Derrick Rose, a vet in Taj Gibson. You have Mitchell Robinson, who's actually one of my favorite centers in the league, one of the more traditional centers that you would see in the early 2000s, in the 90s. And then, of course, you have your stud in Julius Randle and an up-and-coming guy in RJ Barrett, who has had a great season in comparison to last year when he didn't perform as well. But after they beat the Hawks, that's where it gets a little tricky. Let's go through a little bit of a theory here. Let's say that 1, 2, 3, and 4, they all win their series. Let's say those 4 home court advantage teams do win their first round. Now let's look at a matchup against the Philadelphia 76ers. Again, I think when you look at Joel Embiid, who's a beast, I think when you look at Ben Simmons, who's had a great year, your tertiary scorer in Tobias Harris, I don't think that the Knicks have what it takes. A lot of the time when you're trying to compare teams in the playoffs, you want your team, out of the top 5 best players in that series, you want to carry 3 of those guys. If we look at the top 5 best players in that series, but you got to give it to Joel. I could hear somebody maybe make an argument for Julius Randle. However, I'm going to maybe suggest that it's Ben Simmons. But for this, for this theory, let's say that it's Julius Randle. So Julius Randle is number 2. I would say Ben Simmons is number 3. I would say Tobias Harris is number 4. So already you're right there, and you've got 3 of the best 5. Now, that's not to say that, players can't win you a game. Maybe Julius Randle wins you 2 games. Maybe RJ Barrett wins you a game. Maybe Derrick Rose wins you a game. If you can rely on these pieces, which they have so far this year, to win you games, then you might be able to pull something off. However, I don't think you're doing that against the Philadelphia 76ers. I see the New York Knicks season coming to a halt in the second round. Now, that's not a bad year for the New York Knicks. If you were to ask someone at the start of the year, hey, how do you think the Knicks are going to do? Maybe some people say that they make the playoffs. Nobody's saying that they're a top 4 seed in the East. Maybe they say they'll have a competitive year. Julius Randle, they'll get a lot of Julius Randle. No one's saying that Julius Randle is a dominant force on that New York Knicks squad. And if we're looking at the future for the New York Knicks, I think they should be excited. You have now proven under James Dolan, who has been a constant point of conversation when it comes to signing with the Knicks, when it comes to the reasoning of players like Kyrie and Kevin Durant not wanting to play here. LeBron James was even rumored to go to the New York Knicks before he ended up signing with the Lakers. I do think it was the Lakers all along, but these marquee stars, these huge, impactful players, these players that can win you your rounds, can win you a championship, have strayed away from going to the New York Knicks organization because of James Dolan and because how he operates his business and his organization and the team as a whole. Let's not forget about the Charles Oakley situation. Let's not forget about the Patrick Ewing situation. All of this happened under James Dolan. He had a lot to do with the banning of Charles Oakley, if you guys remember that. But this year they found a way to block out the noise. But with the Knicks, they now have a max salary spot going into free agency. Julius Randle is signed for one more year. I think it's definitely under $20 million. I want to say it's 19.3. So for another year, you have this stud who, maybe it was a one-off year. But I do think the usage of Tom Thibodeau and Julius Randle has been excellent. I think that pairing has been perfect. I think that's the type of coach a guy like Julius Randle wants. And it's interesting because a lot of the time, the knock on Tom Thibodeau is that he doesn't do well with younger players. Think about it in the Minnesota Timberwolves organization. Didn't do well with younger players. And now he's got a team that quite a few younger players. Quickly, Barrett, Robinson, Toppin. Julius Randle is kind of in that mid-range. I think he's still 26. Not young, but definitely not old. But then, again, you have those vets in Taj Gibson and in Derrick Rose. Two guys he knows very well, obviously back to the Chicago Bulls days. But now you look at this team with the New York Knicks with a great foundation, some young players, a solid head coach that players want to play for, and you have a max spot. This next year, this next 2 years, for New York Knicks fans, for the New York Knicks organization, is going to be very, very interesting. With the Philadelphia 76ers possibly facing a small turnover, depending on what happens this season, with the Brooklyn Nets really being the dominant force in the East but having no defense, and with the Milwaukee Bucks still trying to figure out who they are and still trying to get to a conference finals, you have an uprising New York Knicks team that really looks like they have everything except that one piece, which they can get in free agency.